It is the act of putting ourselves at the center of the universe where God belongs that is unqualified sin. Making my well-being the priority value above all others is the very definition of sin. When self-interest becomes the dominating commitment of our lives, when we devote our energy to serving ourselves above all others, then we're wrongly self-centered. And every one of us is plagued by this problem. But very few even notice their self-interest. Fewer still are concerned about it. A commitment to our own well-being provides energy for coping with life. It's encouraged. Look out for yourself. Who else is going to? You shouldn't have to put up with that kind of treatment. Nothing is more natural, especially when we suffer from wounds caused by unjust treatment, than to regard our immediate well-being as the final purpose justice should serve. Before we can begin to talk about putting marriages together, before we can discuss the differences between men and women and how they can be enjoyed, before we can recover from our wounds, we must deal with our common problem of self-centeredness. In Christian circles, two very different approaches to building relationships move us away from correcting problems of self-centeredness. The first approach insists that suffering is such an unthinkable violation of a person's dignity that nothing matters more than the restoration and expression of personhood. Take care of yourself. That's the key to happy living. The second approach clubs hurting people over the head with biblical standards in a way that drives them not to Christ and to selfless living, but rather to frustration when they fail or pride when they think they don't. Those holding to this way of thinking reduce self-centeredness to acts of blatant sinfulness that can be cured by scoldings. They hammer against sin with an insensitivity to hurt and pain. The first way of thinking regards wounds from unjust treatment as a far more significant problem than self-centeredness. The second way, in its demands to do what's right, ignores deep hurt. Consider the counsel that might be offered by advocates of the first approach, where self-development is key. I wonder if you felt starved for affection for a long time. Perhaps your strong response to your wife's coldness reflects a deep insecurity that we could work on. Or there's more to you than cook, sex partner, and washwoman. Maybe you've been afraid to be who you really are for fear no one would want you. As you learn to develop your personality, your husband will come to see you as more than a useful object. These responses reflect the idea that an empty, restricted, dull self is the central problem, and self-development is the answer. Become who you are, and all you're meant to be. Take care of yourself. Learn to express yourself. This kind of thinking is sweeping through our churches and is labeled as Christian. Like most bad ideas, this one probably developed in reaction to an opposite but equally wrong viewpoint, one that deals no more effectively with the real problem of self-centeredness. In conservative circles, Christianity too often has been reduced to a joyless moralism, a set of responsibilities that need to be obeyed to demonstrate a regenerated heart. The focus is less on our relationship with Christ and more on the proof of that relationship. Unlike those adhering to the first view, which presents Christianity as a chance to come alive as a person, those holding to the second view typically talk about duties and commandments. Your wife's lack of affection may be difficult to handle, but it's no excuse for leaving her. Or, it's regrettable that you feel so used and empty, but your role as a wife is to submit to your husband, and knowing that you're obeying God will be your joy. Although there is much that is correct and good in these responses, there's also a joy-killing, legalistic attitude. The heart of legalism is to make required performance more central to Christian living than our Lord's invitation to enjoy Him. In this view, the Lord's death becomes the basis for pressured living. It introduces us to a list of rules spelled out by church authorities who never seem to see people as persons. Persons who hurt, cry, feel lonely, remember horrible things done to them in the middle of the night when they were children. For legalists, words like authenticity and personhood have little place. Instead, other words, good ones, like authority and obedience, are wrongly used to enforce rigid conformity to imposed standards. Conformity is regarded as holy living. Holiness is rightly seen as an issue more fundamental than self-expression, but it's wrongly defined to centrally mean do right things rather than love God and others. People who measure holiness by externals give little thought to what may be going on in the heart. Passion and joy are lost, and grace is obscured when obedience to biblical standards is taught in a way that pressures people to do right to gain God's acceptance. That's the second view. Just figure out what's right and do it. That's all there is to it. In that cold climate of legalism where sermons feel like spankings, it's not hard to understand the eager, but still unwise, reception given to the idea that freedom means the chance to think about who you are for a change, to go after what you want, and to express your talents, opinions, and feelings. The shift from harsh spankings to false encouragement is welcomed by many. Self-development is a more appealing value than the pressurized moralism that has had such a negative influence in so many of our churches. With its insistence on rigid roles and narrow rules, moralistic Christianity has done real damage. And nowhere has the damage been greater than in marriage. In the name of submission, wives have endured every form of abuse. They worry that God requires them to sit still while their drunken husbands beat them. They push themselves to cooperate sexually, even when exhausted, to avoid God's displeasure and their husband's scorn. Many have lived within the narrow limits of what women are permitted to do, restrictions supported more often by masculine egos than by clear scriptural teaching, and their lives have been tragically emptied of meaning and joy. A Christianity that emphasizes rule-keeping over relationship insists on clear definition of the rules. It cannot tolerate ambiguity or freedom, especially when it comes to a wife's responsibilities. Far more often than most suspect, men have twisted biblical teaching on headship to justify dominating their wives, in some cases, literally ordering them about as a master would a dog. Headship, a principle derived from Ephesians 5, traditionally teaches that the husband should assume leadership in the home and the church. Yet biblical teaching never indulges the sinful human tendency to lead as a power-hungry despot. Should a wife really fetch a cup of coffee when the signal is given? Husbands who would never think to wash their wives' feet, much less the family's dishes, or to respect their wives' opinions enough to be guided by them, have little understanding of either servant leadership or their own arrogance. Moralism also damages men, but in a different way. Many husbands have crumbled under the weight of wrong perceptions about husbanding, knowing that they simply are not as strong or as wise as they think they should be. Sometimes defeated men have turned to pornography, adultery, depression, workaholism, to find relief from the intolerable burden to be more than they are. Now, adultery clearly is wrong, and so is the demand for relief that fuels it. But the pressure to meet false standards can be so intense that whatever provides relief seems justified. If this brand of Christianity is traditional, and in too many circles it is, then we need new thinking that's as old as the Bible itself. We need to go deeper than a moralistic understanding of sin. We need to grasp what self-centeredness, the essence of sin, looks like. We need to see how a commitment to the self operates when bad things inflict deep wounds in our souls, how we work to preserve some sense of our integrity when we come up against a damaging world, how enraged we become at others who hurt us, and at a God who can't be trusted to protect us from the wounds life can inflict. Our wounds and hurts are real, but we must not become involved in healing them in a way that makes us lose sight of the far larger problem of self-centeredness. We need an approach to relationships that takes seriously our wrong commitment to ourselves, an approach that refuses to justify an attitude of defiant independence of God, an approach that puts us in a place where we recognize the grace of God as our most valued possession. Now, so far I've talked about two approaches, one that tells us to develop and express ourselves in the middle of an uncaring world, the other that instructs us to try harder to always do right. If you believe that a disappointing and sometimes evil world has inflicted damage to people's identity that needs repair before anything else can be done, then the first alternative makes sense to you. If you regard marital problems as nothing more than failure to do what God says, the second option will seem right. But if you agree that self-centeredness is entrenched in the human soul, that it lingers even in Christians, then a third approach is needed. Neither building up our self-image nor trying hard to do right adequately deals with the real problem. How can we come to grips with the self-centeredness that is robbing us of joy and our spouses of blessing? The first step is to face what is going on within us as we relate to others, to think about what's happening beneath the surface of our relationships. And as we take that first step, we'll begin to see that what we do and how we feel in our relationships seems so fully understandable to us. Our commitment to ourselves seems an entirely justified response to all that we've endured. We know how insecure and frightened we sometimes feel, how badly the wounds we've suffered have damaged our confidence. Looking out for ourselves is reasonable.